Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. Will Kleidon is an award-winning pioneer and futurist of the cannabis industry. He's known for cracking the CBD code by creating the most effective and clean CBD-rich hemp products on the planet. He was featured in Cheddar, Forbes, Money, Entrepreneur, LA Times, and I'm sure the list goes on. And he's a regular keynote of the Cannabis Forum and the BevNet. Will is a subject matter expert when it comes to the art, science, and technology of the cannabis business, history of hemp, and what it means to our future. As early as I think 17 years old, he organised and implemented a sustainably fair which drew over 25 organisations and 500 attendees. Will also studied permaculture in the best country in the world, Australia, and achieved the second highest nationally accredited certification in permaculture design. After searching for a CBD-rich oil for a personal need in 2014, he couldn't find one, and I can really relate to this, that was made without synthetic fillers, had third-party batch testing results, and used organic ingredients. Not only did he set out to create the most effective and clean CBD-rich oil products, but what I love is that he was also determined to align them with his love and care for the earth and all of its inhabitants. And so, as a result, Ojai Energetics was born, and on the first public benefit corporation in its industry, I believe. And Ojai Energetics is a triple bottom line driven cannabis technology company with a primary focus on the organic and science driven nutraceutical and medical sectors. Will believes that hemp is a catalyst for things getting better. He created this company to help deliver goodness to the world. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Will. Thank you so much.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And look, I reached out to you because I, like you, when you were 14, could not find, well, first of all, let me be honest. I am over the hype of CBD. Yep. It's sort of like got out of hand. Everyone thinks CBD is going to change your life and it's the best thing in the world, especially in the US where a lot of states were starting to not only approve it for medical use, but just approve it across the board. And then there was, all these different CBD oils. And I feel like every mother, son and dog were starting CBD companies. And so I did the opposite and just sort of took a step back and said, I'm not sort of interested in this. And I think the hype is way more than it should be. And so I took a step back and then I thought I started hearing different anecdotal sort of evidence and then started reading up on the evidence and found that there is actually a lot of science behind the CBD oils, but then it became apparent to me that, like all supplements, it depends on the quality a lot.
Yep.
And so then I started searching for some CBD oil that I could sort of trust. And to be honest, I really struggled. And then I came across you. So I guess where to start with you, maybe you can start by defining exactly what CBD is and how it differs. Because I think, is there 418 compounds that the cannabis plant actually produces?
Yeah, probably more, but at least that identified. And then of those, there's 110 known cannabinoids, and CBD is just one of them. And so it's a compound that the cannabis plant produces, and cannabis can either be psychoactive or non-psychoactive. And the definition between hemp cannabis and non-hemp is the person who set the definition stated in the 70s, this is an arbitrary line. It's not really a botanical distinction at all. It's just we have to draw the line somewhere for legal purposes. And he drew it at 0.3% THC and less is hemp. Anything above that is not hemp cannabis. And now he's actually he's come out and stated that he wishes he set it at 1%. A fair number of countries around the planet are setting it at 1% and less. US is still at 0.3. The psychoactive activity of another cannabinoid, THC, doesn't really kick in until over 1%. So it's closer to the scientific method. So, it's a compound. If we step back and look at how humans have interacted with the cannabis plant, it's, I think, one of the most interesting stories that hasn't really been properly showcased yet. It all the way back to at the kind of the precipice of agriculture, and there's now some evidence demonstrating pre-Neolithic use in Japan, but it really started to kick up in the Altai Mountains region of now China, and right at the beginning of agriculture, there's documented cultivation of this plant. It was considered one of the three great treasures of in Chinese medicine thousands of years ago, and then it was picked up by the Scythians, and the Scythians brought it to the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then the Romans brought it anywhere that they colonized, and they brought it to the Brits, and then the Brits brought it anywhere they colonized. And for millennia, it's been utilized for a varietal of purposes and actually catalyzed epoch shifts, and then simultaneously provided the necessary micronutrients for our bodies to adapt to the associated oxidative stress uptake from these technological shifts, which is really quite unique to the plant. It's one of the oldest vegetables cultivated, and it's been with us through every single journey and epoch for millennia, minus the prohibition in the 30s. And so we've been consuming these compounds for thousands and thousands of years regularly, and primary consumption was through feeding it to the animals, and then consuming the animals and their byproducts. However, there was definitely direct consumption. They just discovered, they had hypothesis and good evidence, but then they found just recently really hard evidence of Scythians with these incense burners containing THC resin, and it would have been higher CBD as well back then. And so also the oldest recipe book that was printed on the planet, it's a Roman cookbook, and in it contains a cannabis cooking recipe. It's really a vegetable, and has been, and a super vegetable at that. So these compounds of cannabinoids and also bioflavonoids and terpenes and enzymes, our bodies have adapted through millennia to eat them, and they actually serve as fuel for our body's endocannabinoid system, which is the system it's got receptors in literally every other system of the body. And its job is to maintain homeostatic balance for every system. So it's like the conductor of the body's symphony of parts, and it needs a full spectrum of cannabinoids, high CBD, low THC, that was the primary adapted intake, with bioflavonoids and terpenes as micronutrients to fuel this system. And so CBD is one of the many necessary compounds that work together in harmony. I liken CBD to be like the trumpet section. It's loud, it's got a lot of press, but our bodies really need the entire symphony orchestra with the trumpet section included for it to properly fuel the system.
Okay, so why is there all this concentration on that one of 110 cannabinoids? Should we be looking at the others?
And the main reason it's definitely it's the loudest. It's the powerhouse in many ways. It's got the broadest profile of very well documented benefits. There is really, we only know out of the 110, about 10 have had proper studies. We're barely scratching the surface in terms of knowing what the other ones do. But like most things in nature, when you isolate it and what we think is an active turns out to be substantially less effective than when it's used in conjunction of what the entire plant produces. And so the grandfather of the endocannabinoid system, the guy who discovered it, Dr. Raphael Mukulayan, tested CBD isolate against a CBD-rich full spectrum complex, and found that the full spectrum had vastly more effective implications in the body. And he dubbed the term the entourage effect. They all work together.
Will, is there a plane flying overhead, or it's stopped now?
Did it? Yeah. Is it?
That's all right. It's gone now. Okay, so that's interesting. So you mentioned that the full spectrum. So when you say full spectrum, are you saying that all 110 cannabinoids are actually in the product?
So the detection limits haven't really been on analytics, have not gotten the standards up for all of them. It depends on the phenotypic expression and cultivar of the plant, but there's certainly the primary ones that are well, that we're able to test for well. It again depends. So the term full spectrum is scientifically broad. What it means is that it's what the plant produced, and not isolated out as single molecules. And then people use the term broad spectrum to mean a non-isolated molecule that also contains that's got THC removed. And so we definitely need an update in terms of what the market is saying versus a standardized syntax of communication. But when people say full spectrum, there's going to be more than just CBD. Typically, it's CBC, CBG, CBDA, trace THC, THCA, some CBDV, and so it doesn't mean all are present. It means that it's not just an isolated form, and the compounds that are present are what the plant that it was derived from haven't been isolated out.
Right. Okay. So we should take the words full spectrum fairly lightheartedly and look into what the company is actually meaning when they say full spectrum.
Yeah, there's a lot of people saying full spectrum when it's not. And so the real way to figure it out is to look at third-party analytic reports, which are going to be detailing the cannabinoids present along with the terpenes. And a lot of companies are just testing that. And in reality, they should be testing for heavy metal content, volatile organic compounds, pesticides, herbicides, and microbes beyond just the cannabinoids and terpenes. But that will let you know if someone's saying full spectrum, it should not just be a CBD peak. There's the potential that at the concentration that it's in, it's not the lab doesn't have the analytic capability of showing the other peaks. That would be more of an anomaly than a general case. And so in general, you want to look at the third-party testing and see that there's more cannabinoids than just CBD in there to make sure that it is really a full spectrum. If it says broad spectrum, if they're doing it properly, it's going to be CBD with some other minor cannabinoids, but non-detectable amounts of THC. That's what people mean when they say broad spectrum. And there definitely are actors who are they have no idea what they're doing. They're just slapping a label on it. It's a white label. They're trying to get a quick buck. And I believe that the people who are doing it with integrity and dedicated to science are going to last. And we're starting to see some action with the FCC, which is great, because there's definitely a swarm of people who have no idea what they're putting out, and that sometimes at best it's just they're ignorant, and at worst they're putting out dirty product.
And Will, so, how often would fillers be in the products?
There's a fair amount of it depends on by filler. Like if it's a lot of companies are putting in MCT, which is fine, but MCT is typically derived from hexane, so a hexane wash. So if they're not purging or cleaning the MCT properly, there's a chance of hexane residue being in there, which the third-party test should pick up if they're testing for VOCs. And then you'll see synthetic agents like polyethylene glycol or polysorbate, which if they're using to create an encapsulation is incredibly I'd say irresponsible given the data that's well established of these compounds have been demonstrated to create air pockets in the liver and the spleen, break down into formaldehyde and antifreeze at a cellular level, and people using pegylation. The data demonstrates it really is, the leading experts, Stanford toxicologists and others, state that alternative methods should be used, and it really should only be used for short-term use for drug delivery, not for regular consumption. And so that's something that's really important to look out for is PEG. And sometimes you'll see a term TPGS, which is a vitamin E molecule attached to the PEG, and they'll call it vitamin E, but in reality, you can stick any molecule on it, and it could be vitamin C or anything attached to the PEG, and really it's the PEG that's there.
So, Will,
and this
what
goes
should we?
beyond just
Yeah.
the CBD space. I mean, we're talking.
I know. So,
Yeah.
but in terms of CBD, or what should we be actually looking for as consumers of good quality products?
Yep.
What questions do we want to ask, or what do we want to look on their website or on their ingredients list?
Yeah, brilliant. So always they should be having third-party batch testing for heavy metals, volatile organic compounds, pesticides, herbicides, cannabinoids, and terpenes and microbes per batch. So sometimes you'll see companies, they'll put one batch of test result up, and then that's from a year ago. They should be able to link the lot number on the bottle to a third-party batch test result every single time. And that way they know what they're getting. And so we were actually the first company to do that full battery of tests and have the results posted per batch every single time. So you knew what you were putting in your body per batch. And I'm happy that other companies are following suit. I'd like to see a broader adoption of that, and companies putting beyond just cannabinoids and terpenes, because it's those other compounds that really need to be people need to be informed of.
So, Will, on that batch testing then, let's say I was going to buy a product, and I mean, obviously if I went into the shop, I could actually get the batch number and then ask the company, I'm thinking about buying this particular batch number. Can you give me the results? I guess that's one way of doing it. But in the case of buying it off the internet, you don't actually know what the batch number is going to be because it's not going to be on the bottle. I'm assuming if it's not on the bottle at all.
It is on the bottle if done properly.
I know, but if I'm buying off the internet, I don't know what the batch number is going to
be. What needs to be what the responsible thing is that anytime a new batch comes on, you load that batch gets loaded up. So whatever is being offered is applicable to the latest batch test that's posted, and there should be record of batch tests.
Great, that's a perfect question.
And that's what we do. Unfortunately, I've yet to really find any other company that does consistent batch with the full battery. Although I'm hoping that there's a few that have popped up. There's so many now.
And how can we be assured that those fillers aren't being added? I mean, obviously, if they've got vitamin E and that sort of thing on the ingredients, but as a regulation, do you even need to mention those in the ingredients?
If you're going to put it in there, you have to. It has to be listed. So there's always the potential of bad actors, like any industry. However, that's where CGMP labs or GMP compliant labs, FDA inspected facilities, and third-party batch testing. You cannot put adulterants in legally. So. And you have to list anything you put in the label. So it's kind of being informed of, but really the main one would be TPGS. And some companies I've seen put they call it vitamin E, and it's not actually legal to do so. And unfortunately, you've got these people who are jumping in, and we call them the bathtub players, and they have no idea what they're doing. Some people are growing hemp and extracting it in their kitchen, and think somehow that because of an FDA opinion, which is not law, and the FDA will clarify it, and Congress is moving to clarify it. Their opinion on CBD not being able to be put in a food or supplement is actually referencing legally only CBD isolate, not a hemp extract that contains CBD. It's created a lot of market confusion. And it's also subsequently people have thought that somehow they don't have to follow regulation, which is naive and not good. So, but yep.
So what else would we look for? Would we look, is how important is it for the product to be organic?
I think it's very important. The USDA for a minute was not certifying hemp, and they've clarified that, and they are now. So the hemp stock should be certified organic. Then there was a period where you had the extraction facilities doing things through organic compliance, but not certified. And finally, the market's caught up, and you can now get certified organic. We're about to have everything we've always done has been certified organic material. And then when there was that USDA period, it was just the hemp extract, the extract part that wasn't certified, although it was done in certified organic compliance. And now we're about to come out and actually be the only water-soluble certified organic CBD, which is big.
Right, excellent. So just for it saying organic doesn't actually mean that it's certified organic, and there's a big distinction there. Would I be right in saying that for CBD oil?
Yeah, they also got companies calling it organic, which they don't have the certifications. You can, what I would recommend, any reputable supplier would willingly supply the organic certificates of the farms and the ingredients.
Great. So obviously batch testing, the whether they're certified organic, and then the full spectrum and what that actually means are all really important. Is there anything else that you think is important? For example, maybe the dosage.
Yeah. So, so the real data, and there's kind of a myth of saying like, oh, it hasn't been studied, where CBD is actually one of the more studied compounds on the planet. It just wasn't done in the US due to prohibition. If you go to PubMed and put in CBD and anything, you'll probably find some preliminary to all the way to double-blind placebo studies on the compound. Israel and Spain have been leaders for decades.
Well, so just on that, how many sort of double-blinded CBD studies do you think there are that are out there?
You know, it's a great question. I don't know offhand, but there's a fair amount. It's not like it's a novel compound. And we know for sure there's the Epidiolex, which is essentially an isolate that's gone through stage 3 and approved now. There's a double blind that was done on CBD and nicotine reduction. And there's more that I don't know offhand.
But of those studies that are out there, especially the peer-reviewed ones, what health effects could you claim? Or is that a bad question to ask a supplement company?
It's not the best question. Yeah. Well, so we are a technology, foremost a cannabis technology company, and we have intellectual property for biotech, medtech, and nutraceutical and industrial. And so I can talk on our IP portfolio of different diseases. Not I cannot say from the supplement arm, because you cannot make structure function, or you can't make drug claims, and the FDA considers treating, preventing, curing, or mitigating any disease a drug claim. What you can say is structure function modulation. And I think it's to go into what it can do and why you've heard all of these. There's these one, I think, irresponsible claims of companies and supplements putting certain things out, which is just you cannot do as a supplement. It's just not the law. And then additionally, we definitely need more data. Right. But understanding what the endocannabinoid system is, it's well established. It's got cannabinoid receptors. You've got CB1 and CB2. They've discovered CB3 recently. I'm fairly certain there's going to be more discovered. We have CB1 and CB2
all throughout every single system of the body: skeletal system, respiratory system, reproductive system, nervous system, cardiovascular system. Literally every single system of the body has endocannabinoid receptors, and even at a cellular level, and an organ level. So its job is to maintain homeostasis. And homeostasis means that it's ensuring that each system is firing at optimal levels in harmony with each other. So you can think of it as like the computing system of a car, making sure that every part of the car is working together in harmony so that it's optimized. And that's what our body's endocannabinoid system is. And so it's arguably the most important system of the body because it is the conductor of every other system. So if you feed that system and get a proper amount of cannabinoids in it, and it's online operating at optimal levels, then every other system of the body is going to be able to be modulated and optimized by the endocannabinoid system. And what we did in the prohibition, we're actually living in an anomaly period in terms of cannabinoid intake in humans. For thousands of years, we had uninterrupted supply, like I talked about earlier, primarily through dietary intake. And really only in a century did we pull it out of the diet, and we kind of 1-2 punched ourselves because it's that simultaneously we rapidly increased oxidative stress. And so one of the ways that the endocannabinoid system regulates homeostasis is by buffering oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is kind of like rust to the cells. And so it's like a force field first, and then it will go in and do modulation and systemic repair, as well as balancing and timing stuff. So you feed that system, and depending on the individual and their epigenetics and their environment, if you take that system and you idle it, certain systems, depending on that individual, are going to go offline more than others. But overall, when you feed that system, what we found is it runs triage, which is like a triage in an ER. But it determines which systems are most in need of cannabinoids, and will deploy those cannabinoids to those systems and go down the checklist. And so there is a preliminary study done in Colorado on hemp-fed chickens. They found, and it hasn't been published yet, but I know the individual who was part of the study, that the chicken fed hemp had up to 1% CBD content. It would have been CBD-A, and I can explain the difference in a second. But it's per egg, which is huge. It's essentially 250 milligrams of CBD per egg, and that's just one egg. So if we look at the historical usage of feeding it as a fodder crop, as well as in using it and consuming it directly, we're talking about people were consuming well over 500 milligrams of CBD regularly. And so we artificially pulled this out of the diet in prohibition. And so that's why we're finding when people are getting an appropriate dose, most people are getting nowhere near enough CBD. And I believe majority are getting placebo. And trace amounts of THC, which would be in a full spectrum extract, will convert through first pass digestion into a compound called 11-hydroxy delta 9 THC, which is bioactive in very low dosages. And I think that's responsible for a lot of the inflammation help in the body that people are experiencing. But the real meat of data shows that you need really at minimum 500 milligrams. You could argue 250, but the strong data really kicks in at 500 milligrams daily, and that's at the low end of dosage. And so it's really important that people are getting an effective dose, and bioavailability is a big piece of that. It's just not efficient when we eat it. As an oil-based form, our body destroys 90% of the cannabinoids, and it takes about 30 minutes to nano-encapsulate it in our gut at 40 nanometers. And so people are very it's to consume 500 milligrams at minimum of a fat-based form is very expensive, and it's a lot of oil to eat. And so we figured out how to encapsulate it at the same nanometer size that our gut does, using only certified organic plants back in 2014, such that the body can uptake it immediately upon contact of the mucosa membrane and bypass that system, the digestive part altogether, and actually get a substantially effective increase in bioavailability, meaning 1 milligram is the equivalent of well over 20 milligrams of a fat-based CBD equivalent.
So does that mean someone can take, say, 40 milligrams instead of 500 milligrams, 40 milligrams of your product and get the same benefits of 500 milligrams?
Yes, and the data is showing now. So fat-based compound, our body curcuminoids are basically very similar to cannabinoids in terms of their pharmacokinetic profile, and what that means is the way that the body absorbs, and essentially it's bioavailability. And the data shows with our process, it increases curcuminoids by well over 100x, and that's what we're finding with practitioners and with our formulation. So once we finish our human PKs, we can further update the bioavailability, but the data is demonstrating very strongly that it's actually well over 100. So one could get with 5 milligrams an effective dose, and that's what we find. We have a ton of people come to us and say, well, I tried CBD, didn't do anything, and oh my goodness, this is game changing. I actually feel CBD now. And it makes sense because they just, the body needs, it's kind of like priming a pump. You need to get enough in for it to actually engage. And so it's exciting.
Yeah, and Will, I'm sure there are other companies out there claiming that their products are very good when it comes to bioavailability, and therefore you only need to have 1/10 of or 1/100th of the dose. But how do we actually know whether it is, apart from obviously taking it and feeling the effects? How do we know that it's going to be bioavailable to us?
Yeah, so there's different methods of enhancing bioavailability. You can decrease particle size, and so there's CBD isolate products. I think first it's important that like the consumer is going for not getting just an isolate, right? That's one compound versus over 400 compounds. That's first step. And then so some companies are taking the isolate and they're just decreasing the particle size, and so that it's enhancing its ability to go into water. And the reason that it's important that it can go through water is our bodies have
are made up of predominantly water.
Yeah, and it's the gatekeeper to the blood. Right. And so we've adapted this because once a fat gets through and into the blood, it can travel anywhere in the body. So we've evolved having a bouncer, so to speak, that prevents fats from making it into the bloodstream. And they have to sit in the gut, and that's where the liver kind of susses out whether it's something that's recognizable and compatible, and if it's not, it will flush it out through the elimination system. Versus if it says, okay, this is something I want to let in, that's when the bile secretes, and it nano-encapsulates the fat at 40 nanometers. So, and then it can make it past the water layer, and then it diffuses out as a fat once it's in the blood, and then can travel wherever it wants to go. Which is another reason why it's really important if someone's enhancing solubilization or bioavailability that they're not using anything synthetic or synthetically modified, because it's essentially sneaking it past the bouncer, and our bodies would innately at macro scale, if it's even synthetically modified, the body doesn't like it, and particularly if it's synthetic, it would try and flush it out. And when you decrease the particle size to nanoscale, you're sneaking it past. And so it's really important that you're not using anything synthetic to do that. And there are companies, unfortunately, doing that, which is talked about earlier with the polyethylene glycol or TPGS. So one test is you can put it in a glass of water, and if it goes straight through and you agitate it and it's completely homogenized, that's going to be way more bioavailable than an oil-based solution, which would just float on the top. And that's a good representation of how it would act in your body. And then that's one step. And then really diving in is if it's a liposomal encapsulation, one, it's going to be using synthetically modified compounds to make it. Two, liposomes were designed for water-soluble compounds because the liposome has a water core, and then there's a fat layer around the water core, and then outside of that fat layer is a water compatible surface. And if you eat vitamin C, for example, it's water soluble, but once it makes it through, so it gets through right away, but once it's in the blood, the cells don't pick it up easily. And so the liposome was created to kind of sneak it in to the cells as if it was a fat. But when you use a liposomal for a fat-based compound, you're going to improve bioavailability because you're decreasing particle size, and you have the water compatible external layer, but the fat just sits comfortably in the phospholipid bilayer of the liposome that has the water core, and it stays there. It doesn't have incentive. The pressure differentiation, it doesn't move out as readily, and that's why a liposomal formulation, people won't, if they feel anything, they won't feel anything for about 15 to 20 minutes, and the pharmacokinetic profile for liposomes with cannabinoids as well as curcuminoids is 8x improvement. If you just took the isolated form and decreased particle size, in nanomil, you get a 3x improvement for curcuminoids, and you get a 3x improvement for cannabinoids in about a 20-minute onset. And then what we figured out is how to use certified organic plants to do a single layer encapsulation. And so the second that it gets in, it pops out of the form and goes out as a fat. And for curcuminoids, it's been demonstrated to have over 100x with a very rapid onset, and that's what we're finding with our data aggregation is the same for cannabinoids, and most users will feel the effect and actually feel it because of the bioavailability in under a minute most times.
It's funny you say that, because that's the first differentiation I had with your product was as soon as I took it, I felt the effects, and I'm like, oh, what that is that meant to happen? I mean, I know it's bioavailable, but is it that bioavailable?
It's pretty amazing.
I thought it was slightly placebo, but now that you've said that, that makes sense.
And when you see it with dogs, and they respond in about a minute, they you don't have placebo with dogs.
So given that it is more bioavailable, you mentioned your product, you can take 5 mils, is that right? Versus 500. 5
milligrams. Yeah. So basically less than a dropper is enough to have where the data shows is like the bare minimum of fueling the endocannabinoid system.
And how much of that 5 mils would you actually be absorbing?
Majority of it's going to be getting in, and then once it's in, it's more readily uptaked by the body. So pharmacokinetics are a little confusing because you can have over 100x. Because first stage is how much gets in. Second stage is once it's in, how readily available is it for the cells to use? One of the issues with synthetic liposomes is like it takes a while to get in, but once it's in, because it's synthetic, the body does have a secondary kind of filter, and it will tag these they're plasticizers, but it's petroleum derived. It's basically multiple chains of antifreeze, which is disgusting. I don't know many people who would want to eat nano petroleum derivatives, but the body will tag it in some cases and then automatically flush it out as with an immunoresponse. So that's the second part of pharmacokinetics. So you get the majority of it in there, and then the equivalency piece is it's going to be as if you ate over 500 milligrams of a fat-based formulation.
Right. So I guess that explains the differentiation in pricing as well, because you can get very cheap CBD oil and then you can get very expensive. And so I guess, but when you look at all of these metrics, it makes sense. So I guess that's another thing to look out for, is what the price is and what you're actually getting for that.
No doubt. And when you see giant numbers with claiming full spectrum, what they're doing in all likelihood is taking a full spectrum oil and then spiking it up with isolate.
Yeah.
Get that artificial higher number. And again, it's right. It's how much is it can your body actually use? With a fat-based, 90% of what your body can use, or 90% of what you've eaten, is destroyed and flushed out of the body. So if you eat 20 milligrams, your body can really only use 2 milligrams of active, but you're paying for 100% of it. And so and now we're seeing a flood of really poor quality. And when you account for bioavailability, our products are by far the most affordable on the market.
And so, Will, I know we touched on sort of health effects, but rather than talking to health effects, who should take CBD oil?
Really, they're given the and what we're going to see get more and more flushed out is that these are really vital micronutrients. Just like we need vitamin C, we need our full spectrum cannabinoid intake to have an optimized endocannabinoid system, and that's how we have evolved for millennia, eating these compounds regularly, and so it's more the contraindicate. There's really no one who wouldn't benefit. Additionally, so it's essentially people who shouldn't take it. We need more data on its potential to act like grapefruit. There's some preliminary data, and I want to see more of it. And the way that they connect CBD in particular in a full spectrum complex, a high CBD extract acts as an adaptogen. It's a modulator. It's not single directional, whereas high THC is more like a scalpel. It kind of moves things in one direction. And it would be very unlikely for it to not act like a modulator when it comes to digestive enzymes. However, there's one very limited data point showing that it can decrease P450 enzymes like grapefruit. And then another study showed that it can increase certain ones. And that's where we really need to look at it as, okay, we need more data to see if it's actually a modulating effect and not a single directional. And my hypothesis is that it would be more of a modulating effect. But that being said, it's better to err on the side of caution. And so it could act like grapefruit. And so if someone's on a medication that says do not take with grapefruit, they should assume that it could act like grapefruit.
Right. I've never even seen a medication that says that, but that's interesting. Okay. And so I feel like we've got a pretty good understanding of that. But what and like to your point, everyone should probably be taking it apart from that small minority. But if I'm suffering from inflammation or cramping, or I'm an athlete and I'm burnt out, are these the people that should be taking it? What about sleep? What sort of studies have sort of reviewed?
There's a great amount of we get people all the time who contact us saying that they've had the best sleep of their life, even taking it early in the morning. So the circadian rhythm is regulated by the endocannabinoid system. So sleep disturbance, the sleep cycles are regulated by the endocrine and circadian rhythm. Both systems are regulated by the endocannabinoid system. When it comes to particularly athletes, you're going to be inducing more oxidative stress events, and if you have exercise-induced pain, we can say that the CBD on our supplement division is good at helping reduce that from temporary extreme overuse exercise. We have a tremendous amount of input of people's recovery time just getting massively diminished. We work with a lot of athletes, and it still seems miraculous, even though understanding the biomechanics of how it works, it's pretty awesome. We did look at inflammation cofactors with Quest Diagnostics on a 60-day period with a limited data size, but it's decent, of 15 people. Had seen their data beforehand. We chose 60 because it tends to have more teeth than 30. The placebo arc starts to really kind of diminish after 30 days. And a UCLA cardiovascular surgeon oversaw it, and he had high hopes for like a 3 to 4% reduction in these inflammation markers, homocysteine, C-reactive protein, and I forget the other one. And it came back at a 12 to 14% reduction across the board, which he was blown away by. And so for recovery, it's amazing.
Is there any other sort of people that should, in your eyes, be taking it? So obviously sleep, recovery.
Yeah, I mean, again, really, as modern humans, we need it more than ever before. On particular things, there's demonstration of increasing neuroplasticity, neurogenesis in multiple regions of the brain. It helps support a healthy digestive system. It helps support your skeletal, cardiovascular, nervous system, respiratory. It feels the endocannabinoid system is responsible for optimizing every single system of the body.
And Will, is it possible? Sorry.
Hey.
No, carry on.
Oh yeah, if you go to PubMed, PubMed, and put in CBD, you'll find a plethora of data.
And is it possible to overdose?
No. I mean, in theory, yes, but in practicality, no. You would be very sick from the water content before you would get toxicity of cannabinoids, which is pretty amazing.
And so up until now, we've been sort of speaking more about the oral rather than the topical product. Can you tell us a bit more about your amazing full spectrum sports gel that you have?
Yeah, so it uses our technology, and then it's filled with other amazing certified organic botanicals. It's incredible for people for massage, after working out, for the skin. It's a really versatile product, and it's, again, another one where the stories just kind of blow you away, but then you understand the data and the science, and it makes sense. But it's
one of the questions I had with that, Will, was that I noticed that in the ingredients there was MCT in it.
Yep.
And
certified
you mentioned
organic.
but you mentioned earlier that perhaps having MCT isn't the best idea.
Source of MCT. So you can generate MCT via fractional distillation through basically like spinning it and having the parts fly out, versus cheaper products use hexane to do it.
Got you. Okay,
yep.
that makes sense. So I guess this brings me to my sort of final question. Well, actually, I've got two questions for you. Firstly, where's all this going, do you think? I mean, we mentioned the other 109 cannabinoids, and you keep coming out with number 1, number 2, and number 4. Are you going to find 3, 5, and 6 to be beneficial anytime soon? And how's that going to sort of change?
Of receptors in the body or cannabinoids?
Well, both, I guess. Because I guess they go hand in hand a bit.
They do, yeah, totally. And then even terpenes. So, like, kind of the secret stars, I think, are the terpenes, which cannabinoids are made up of terpenes. They've got they're a terpene hybrid, but these compounds called terpenes are what smell and taste, and pretty much every plant produces them. Cannabis is unique in that it really doesn't produce, it's a unique terpene, but it's the broadest producer of terpenes, meaning one varietal can smell like an orange, and the other one can smell like a diesel engine, and the other one can smell like a pine forest. And these compounds do a lot more than just smell when it comes to cannabinoids. They actually serve as like little tugboats to the cannabinoids and direct them to where to different payload sites in the body. And with terpenes are really bioactive via inhalation. It goes through olfactory, and it crosses into hypothalamus and then deploys out. And so it's more experienced in people with higher THC cannabis, where different strains have different effects. Indicas tend to be sedative for people, whereas sativas tend to be very energizing and cerebral. And if you look at the analytics of the cannabinoids and the minor cannabinoids, it's pretty much the same. It's really the terpenes that differ. But when you eat them, it's even less bioavailable than the cannabinoids, and so a cookie is just a cookie. But unique to our technology, because it gets into the bloodstream immediately, if you smell an essential oil or a plant or any terpene, when you take the elixir, the timing syncs up because it gets in so quickly, and you can actually remember we talked about how the system runs triage. You can bump a system of your choice to the top of the list using terpenes as little biorudders or tugboats. So terpenes are really going to be big when people start to see how they interact with cannabinoids. And then, it's exciting to see. I mean, to dive into the other, CBN is one that's going to rise up that is incredibly helpful for sleep. CBG is another powerhouse. You're going to see a surge of that next year. Is very it's quite stimulating, and it's got a plethora of benefits. Again, isolating them versus using them in a plant complex of full spectrum. The full spectrum, you need the entourage for it to really fuel the system properly. CBC is another one that's really fascinating. It's very much beneficial for mood enhancement.
So do you sort of think that your full spectrum might end up being a combination of CBD, CBG, CBN, all these different compounds?
All of the elixirs have minor cannabinoids like so we don't have a lot of CBN in our current formulas, but we will be coming out with CBN heavy ones. But we've got CBG and CBC, and then CBDA, which is the acid form. So when the plant produces the cannabinoid, it doesn't produce CBD. It actually produces CBDA and THCA, and you need to heat it to what's called decarboxylate. So there's a carboxy complex that's attached to the CBD molecule, and it's an acid, and when it breaks off, it changes from CBDA into CBD. And the acid forms of the cannabinoids are really interesting, less broad in usage, but important. And what's really interesting, if we look at the dietary historical intake, if you feed a cow hemp and you milk it, you're going to be getting CBDA. And if you eat the cow, you're going to be heating it and decarboxylating it and getting CBD. With the egg, you'd heat it and you take the CBDA and turn it into CBD. The chicken, if you eat the chicken, you're going to be getting CBD. So the primary intake would have been of decarboxylated from cooking the animal products or the animals, but then the milk products would have the acid form. And so what we're finding is, what I think is fascinating is there's broader usage of the decarboxylated, but some dietary intake of the acid forms is very important as well. You just don't need as much.
So in that case, would you change it back to like the CBD if you were to heat the goat's milk?
If you cooked it, it would decarboxylate it and become CBD. Yep.
Interesting.
And so I had a Lyft driver who's from Nepal in the mountain regions, and I said, "Hey, I've got a question. Does cannabis grow there wild still?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, it's everywhere." And I said, y'all like to eat yaks and yak milk, right? He's like, oh yeah, we love it. And I was like, oh, so what do the yaks eat? And he goes, actually, they love to eat cannabis. And I went, yeah. So it's Dave Asprey's first bulletproof experience of yak milk likely had a CBD benefit in there as well.
So that's what it was. All right, awesome. And so we've touched a lot on the health and sort of where to from here with CBD and other similar cannabinoids. But what do you think is going to happen, and what is the situation now with the law in regards to CBD and maybe even if you can touch on THC as well in terms of state to state in the US, but also worldwide. I mean, we talked a bit about Australia and a couple of the Asian countries, and I'm particularly interested because I definitely want to continue your products. I'm moving to Singapore, and so tell me more about that.
Yeah. So, So at a federal level in the United States, I'll start with the U.S. The 2018 Farm Bill further clarified the 2014, saying that hemp-derived cannabinoids, including THC that's below 0.3%, are not scheduled compounds, period.
And do you think that's going to potentially move up to 1? Instead of 0.3, or do you think that fight would be?
I do, but I don't think it's going to be not immediately. Okay. Some countries are starting there. Certain countries in Europe, Ecuador, I believe it was Ecuador, just announced that they're going to set it at 1%. Colombia is 1%.
Colombia is probably 100%, but yeah.
No. They're actually kind of leading the way with hemp production in South America.
Okay, so sorry, that was the federal law in the US.
Yeah, and then you go to FDA, which regulates dietary supplements. Now, the FDA doesn't write law; it only enforces law. And so when in 2015 they came out with the opinion that you could not put CBD in a food or supplement because it was already substantially announced that it was being studied as a drug. And so then they reference the clause that Congress wrote that they can enforce, and it's called the 201FF 3BII. And the intention of that clause was that it costs a drug company about $30 million to start an investigational new drug. And they didn't want a novel compound, something synthesized in the lab that's never been in the food supply, to be knocked off and the reason they put the words substantially publicly announced was once they announce it, they didn't want a chemist to come in and replicate and synthesize it and go sell it as a supplement for a multitude of reasons. Really, the strong ones and the main ones are, one, they don't want potentially untested and heavy side effect compounds entering the food supply. And two, they didn't want to create a disincentive. They didn't want to disincentivize drug companies from spending $30 million just to be knocked off as a supplement. That is not the case with cannabinoids whatsoever. They've been in the food supply for millennia, and in fact, and so that's part one. Part two is there's another clause that distinguishes a molecule that's been isolated to above about 97% purity and up, and isolated as a single molecule, versus a botanical complex that contains that molecule that's not an isolated form. And so they're legally different articles, meaning they're legally an apple and an orange. And due to drug purity laws, no IND has ever taken place for anything other than an isolate. And so the FDA's opinion is accurately applicable to CBD isolate. However, no IND has taken place nor ever will take place for a hemp extract that contains high levels of CBD. That's going to be clarified, I'd say latest Q2 of 2020, but it's definitely created confusion. And so that's legally, there is nothing barring a full spectrum or even broad spectrum, meaning the THC removed hemp complex that contains high CBD to be in as a food or supplement. Now, at a state level, though, you can have states passing laws that bar it. There's a handful. The checkerboard is rapidly going to allowance, mainly because the legislators realize the amount of jobs as well as money that can be taxed that they're missing out of. So that's kind of their incentive. So thankfully those states there's a couple lingering, like South Dakota and then Idaho and Iowa.
Okay.
But so there's that. And then that's kind of covering US. Then you've got departments of health in the states who are saying they're just following the FDA opinion, which is it's actually not office
an opinion.
Well, it is an opinion because the FDA has to make an office action and then a final rule for it to become actionable, and they've never done that because it's been it hasn't been clarified that what they're referencing is publicly. They have clarified when spoken to internally, but that it's not, that this clause is applicable to isolate only and not a full or broad spectrum. So then you have state confusion. We're clarifying that. We're working on that in California. I'm the chairman of the California Hemp Council. We're going to get that clarified very quickly. But so ostensibly, what it's done is it's created kind of confusion of bigger box retailers where they're saying, until we get clarity, we don't want to move, but we want to move because this is the fastest growing industry. They're going to be pushing for clarification because they want to be able to sell it. States want to be able to get the jobs and taxes from it. So that's going to, like I said, it's going to clarify latest 2020 Q2, and full spectrum, broad spectrum will continue to be legal and further be clarified as legal for food and beverage and supplements. Now, other countries, Australia, unfortunately, is way behind. They're allowing it for medical usage, but they're not allowing it at all for food or supplement. We're working on that. Singapore is not there yet, but they are rapidly. They're in process right now to allow it for production and supplements. Thailand, we have had a really cool success story with the one of the Thai royal family members, and subsequently legislation's been passed to allow it. And now they're even expanding into THC. And so you're going to see Asia catch up. China's certain provinces it's allowed, other provinces it's not. It's kind of a gray area in China.
Wow. So it sounds like it really depends on the country. And I assume there's some serious consequences if you go against those laws. So I'm going to have to be careful. But excellent. I'll have to stay tuned. I really appreciate everything you've taught us about this because, like I said, there's so much hype and there's so much confusion.
Great question.
And I'm going to actually put a link, thanks to you, a special link for my listeners to get a special deal on your products because it's the only product that I can honestly say that I would recommend getting. And so that's awesome. And look, I've just got one more question for you, slightly random, a question that I ask all the guests on the show. Do you have a tattoo? And maybe it's potentially a cannabis leaf.
That's a great question. I do not. The only tattoo that I've considered and hasn't clicked with is actually kind of the spiral, similar to our logo. When I was in New Zealand, I had a really life-changing, multiple kind of being taught by Maori on multiple occasions, and the koru was gifted to me by my dad as greenstone, and so it held a lot of significance, and it would be done traditionally if I did get it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right. Well,
Question.
maybe you'll get that one day. That's great. Thank you so much, Will. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great question. This has been great. Thank you.
For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.ali.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.